Okay, so we are on Pei Gimel, Pei Daled Amud Aleph, 84a. And we're in the middle of a story, actually. About halfway through the page. And the line starts with Mikara. And it's the word right after that, Mikara, my Avdullah, that's the word we're at. So the story we had is Rabbi Yochanan, who had this sickness called Safidna. Not sure I pronounced that. Safidna. And it's a kind of sickness that begins in the teeth, in the gums, and then goes down to the stomach, through the throat. And it's a very dangerous sickness. So he went to some healer and asked for a remedy, and she gave him that remedy on Thursday and then Friday. And then it comes to Shabbos. He tells her, look, I can't come to visit you. Well, what do I do if I need healing? She was hesitant because she doesn't want to give away her patented recipe. But he swore to the God of Israel, he's not going to reveal what she tells him. He's a respectable rabbi, so she trusts him, and she gives him a remedy. Right after she gives it to him, he tells her, look, in my vow, I said I promised that I wouldn't tell it to the God of Israel, but I'm going to tell it to the Jewish people. And that's what he did. He went and told the whole world what he had learned from her. This remedy. That's what the Gemara says. And in this way, he avoided lying, and this way, he avoided giving a bad reputation. In other words, if she would have thought that he had sworn legitimately not to tell anybody, and then she found out later that he told them, it would have been terrible, would have been a bad, look bad. So he explained to her what he's doing. He explained to her how he had outsmarted her. Okay. So Gemara wants to know what's the healing? What was the remedy that she gave him? So it's middle of the page on page Yadal Amud Aleph, 84a. I think it's the second page in the packet that we have here. Middle of the page, the line begins with the word Mikara, and then the second word is my. So the Gemara asks, my Avdaleh, what did she do for him? What was the remedy? He told it to the whole world, so we should have a record of it. He told it to his classes, his students. So Amar Rav Acha Rab Ami, Rab Acha, son of Rab Ami, says, the remedy is Mesa yeast water, which is there's old-time yeast is essentially sourdough, which is flour and water that's been fermented. So different ways you can preserve that for longer, so that you can use a little bit of it as you make bread going forward. So you can actually keep the actual sourdough itself, the actual flour and water that's fermented. You can use that, and that's a harder way to preserve it. You have to use it more quickly, I think, or you have to maintain it, or you have that soak in water. Or actually, no, sorry. You can take yeast liquid from fermented hops or beer. Like when you make beer, you make not a stout. What's it called? A beer or another word for it, where you ferment hop or ferment wheat to make into a drink, but then there's leftover yeast in that thing. Yeah. There's leftover yeast in that, and you can use that to make your bread. Here. You can come on this way. So one sort of Ami says use mesa liquid yeast. That was the remedy, together with shem and zayit, together with oil, melach, and salt. We're on Pei Daled Amud Aleph. We're on 84a. Right in the middle of the page, the line begins with the word melach, and then the next word, Rabbi Yoma. So we're going through the options of what were the remedies that this woman gave Rabbi Yochanan that he released to the whole world. You have it? Line begins with the word melach, middle of the page. And then the second word is Rabbi Yemar. Have it? Okay, so that's the first opinion. The first opinion was Rav Rav Ami, who said that the remedy that Rabbi Yochanan got from this woman was liquid yeast, olive oil, and salt for his infection in his gum, and then it goes down to the throat. Right? That was the story yesterday.
Oh, this is the secret.
The secret remedy that he revealed. Yes, correct. So Rav Yemir says it was sa'ur gufei, not liquid yeast, but actual yeast itself. Shemen, zayis, olive oil, melach, and salt. That's the second variant on this remedy. Rav Ashi says it was mishcha de gadfa de avza. This is the other two are kind of similar to each other. This one's completely unrelated. It's the bone marrow of a certain bone in the wing of a geese. That's the other opinion. Bone marrow of a certain. Rashi identifies which bone it is. Maybe you guys know the French. The word is where is it? Canal. Maybe the L is silent. Canal. I'm not sure I would say it in French, but that's what Rashi says. This bone. It's kind of must have a broken telephone. Must have over time people got lost. This is a few generations later, and then it must have been passed down, and it got lost in the mix. Oh, the one that worked. So you would think the one that worked is the right one. Very good. So Amar Abaye says, "Navdin lakula." I tried all three of these. The late and I wasn't healed. So I don't know if maybe all of them were wrong, or maybe they stopped working. I don't know. Because it seemed like it worked for Rabbi Yochanan because he kept going back there for 3 days in a row. Or it could be, yeah, it could also depend. But you'll see that, it could be, it depends on how bad the person's infected, yeah. But he has another remedy. So Abaye tried all of these, didn't work. Ad Amali Ayu Taya, till I met this Arab merchant. So it's not an uncommon thing in the Gemara where sages talk to Arab merchants, they're called Tayas, and get information from them. Because Arab merchants are essentially travelers, so they're like information highways, you know. They know what's going on here. I met a doctor here who told me this. I heard, this is that's how people collected information. The Gemara says elsewhere about a certain sage who used to go to the ports and wait for people to come back to find information about things about different places in the world, to kind of collect data, if you will, to know what's going on. And you use these information for halacha. Anyway, so it's not uncommon that people would do that. The sages would do that. This expression, hahutaya, that Arab merchant. It's a rather common phrase.
Rabbis sages that came from Israel, Babylon,
bringing information with them. Yeah, so that's how information traveled. You don't have internet, so information traveled literally as people traveled. Right. So I met this Arab merchant, and he told me, he said, bring kishiasa de zesa, bring the grain, the pit of an olive, the lemol tli soil, the pit of an olive that has not ripened, a third. So it's only a third ripe. You take the pit of an olive, it's only a third ripe. The kalenua b'tanara, and you burn it in a oven, but in a certain type of, using a certain type of wood. Imra chaleta, using you burn it together with a new, what's the word for it? It's a thing. It's like a stick you use to cut down grass, like an ancient version of a lawnmower. What's it called? A hoe. That's the right word. A hoe. A sickle, something like that. A hoe, a sickle, something like that. So you got to burn it with that. A seed from a olive that's only ripened the third. Burn it with this device, the sickle, and then I guess you take the ashes, the idbik, the kechid dare, and you paste it on the strip of your gum and teeth. That's the remedy, because this sickness that he called tzapedina starts in the mouth, starts in the teeth and gums, and then goes down through the throat into the stomach. So he said, put it onto your teeth. And Abaye says, Avdi hachi aditzo, vitzai, and I was healed. Right. The Gemara asked, my Hava, where does the sickness come from? What should we avoid? Preventative medicine. Says the Gemara, two things cause it. I don't know if it's a combination of the two or it's one of the two. I'm not sure. But the Gemara says two things that cause the sickness. From eating extremely hot wheat bread.
Eating what?
Extremely hot wheat bread. One. Number two, mishyare kisida handasa. And from leftover kisida handasa, as Rashi explains it, where is that Rashi? Is a kind of dish that they would like bread. They would bread fish and then fry it. It's like fried fish today. First covered in flour. I think it's breadcrumbs, but flour, breaded fish. But it's not breaded, it's flour instead. It's some kind of thing. No, fry it. Yeah. It's, yeah, people still do that. You use egg and then battered. Yeah. So here it doesn't mention eggs, but it's something of that type. So leftovers of that dish together and extra hot wheat bread can cause this sickness. That's what the Gemara says. But the extremely hot wheat bread, I'm trying to think of what that would be. But the leftover fish, you might think it's mold. If you don't have refrigeration, and fish in general has to be very, very fresh. If it's not, and I imagine if you're living in the middle of, I don't know how far is Babylonia from the water. It's not just they have the Tigris River; they have rivers run through Babylonia. Yeah, that's right. They have the big rivers there. Right. So I don't know, but I can still imagine leftover fish as some sort of mold. And I'm wondering what the extra hot wheat bread might be. Burn the gums would cause such a sickness to the point. And then let something else in. If you burn your gums, and now that it's open, it's exposed to other things. That's it. That makes sense. Call what? Call what? Gingivitis. Gingivitis? So maybe then it's a combination. The hot bread burns your gums, and then the fish brings in the moldy fish brings in the sickness. Maybe it's a combination of both. If you rip your gums, if you rip the gums and something food goes in.
And then it slowly seeps into your gum through your saliva.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's still processed because obviously your gums aren't damaged, but these people play a lot faster.
So this might be a combination of both. This would make sense. It's very good. So if the hot bread loosens the protection that your gum offers, and then you have this moldy fish, then it can cause sickness. Makes sense. The oil itself that comes with the fish is a way of bringing the bacteria to seep in. And if you don't have toothbrush and toothpaste, you don't have anything to kill the bacteria. This is a problem. Yeah. There are other places in the Gemara that indicate that people suffer from teeth quite a bit. I mean, even until recent history, people suffer from teeth. It's a big. That would explain why salt was part of the remedy. Like a saline solution. Like washing with salt water is a kind of, this is so the remedy is like an ancient version of washing your mouth out with salt water or baking powder or something like that. You use baking powder, which explain why what was the other thing in the yeast? Very interesting. It's I love these things. It's very interesting. Sorry? Doesn't burn you. Very good. And it turns it into a cream, so so the oil makes it into a cream, making it more easy to apply, and then the salt takes out bacteria, and draws it out, and the yeast does a similar kind of thing, like a baking powder, like rinsing mouth, like a baking powder toothpaste type thing. Very cool. That's also why the last right. Well, that makes sense, right? We know it starts off in the gums. It puts it in there. So why this one? Ashes of what is it? Ashes of olive pit. You would think though that the burning it would you would think that burning it would destroy its chemical properties. Maybe it releases it. You extract whatever nutrients it has. That's in an olive pit. It'd be interesting to see.
the notes and actually knows about the like food.
Someone can cut open an olive pit and put it into a lab and find out what's in there.
But I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's you can like cook that.
Sure. Okay, so you guys have some homework. All right. So we'll ask now. Okay, so now we know how it. We know its remedy. We know how it comes, how it happens. Now, my simona, what are the symptoms? So Gemara says something similar to you were saying. When you put anything in between your teeth, and your gums start bleeding. If that's what happens, you know you're starting to get the sickness. Yeah, well, if you floss and your gums start bleeding, it's because you're not cleaning your teeth often enough and not taking care of them. Right? Okay. Because for the most part, our mouth are clean. Mouth are clean. But in the old days, you didn't have that. Even if not, even if you go to the dentist even if you're not cleaning your mouth every day, if you go to the dentist once a year, you're already light years away from what these people were dealing with.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Really, even once a year you go to the dentist. You should be supposed to be going twice a year, right? But even if you go once a year, once in 2 years, you're still light years ahead of what these guys are dealing with. It's a few places in the Gemara which indicate that people suffer quite a bit from their teeth. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now the Gemara gets into the halacha of this because this is what we introduced this whole thing for. Now, more comments. Rabbi Yochanan, we mentioned earlier, who was the person who introduced us to this sapindina and then the healing from this woman. So Gemara says, Kichash, sapindina, when he would suffer from sapindina, I just want to comment the way the Gemara phrases this. When he would get sick of sapindina, it sounds like it wasn't something that happened once in a while. It happened. You know, it's before, the first story you might have thought it was a one-off. He got struck by this sapindina thing. But from the way the Gemara says, Kichash, when he would suffer from sapindina, it sounds like it happened more than once. It's like not an uncommon thing. He would contract this sickness. And Avadachi, he would do this, whichever version of the healing it was mentioned above. He would do it, whatever this woman gave her, but Shabbat, even on Shabbos. The Itzin would get healed. So the Gemara now is deriving from here that Rabbi Yochanan says the view, obviously, that this is the kind of healing you're allowed to do on Shabbos. Even though the halacha is that generally speaking, healing you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, unless there's a danger. But just taking a Tylenol, for example, is problematic on Shabbos just for a headache. Unless it's a headache, halachas are complicated, but unless it's headache to the point where you're incapable of experiencing Shabbos. If it's a question of pleasantry, same thing with heartburn. The person had heartburn to the point that they couldn't eat their Shabbos meal because it was too much. They'd be able to take Tums or Zantac, something like that. But if not, okay, so it's a different story. If a person's on medication that the doctor prescribed. Yeah, so the assumption is it takes you to. Oh, so that's the thing, right? So if it's a thing that's going to lead to something a lot worse, but if it's a question of discomfort, then one's not supposed to take healing. Yeah, this is generally the halacha. Yeah. Yeah. The Gemara talks about chosh b'roisha and how bad the headache is. But anyway, and these kind of halachas be machmer on yourself and makel with somebody else. Right? And these kind of halachas, you'd be strict on yourself and you'd be lenient with somebody else. That's how these things are. Okay, so when he would take this medicine apply this medicine on Shabbos, whatever the woman gave her. And if the Gemara asks, how could Rabbi Yochanan do such a thing? One's not allowed to do healing on Shabbos. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak explained, no, Shani Tzapidina. Tzapidina is a different case. It's not a regular headache. It's not a question of discomfort. Considering that it starts in the mouth, the and ends in the stomach, it's a question that leads to danger, like you were saying. A person who has acid reflux to the point that if he doesn't take care of it, it's going to cause some later problems, and he can take his Tums or his Zantac, whatever it is. And likewise here, this is a sickness that starts in the mouth. So right now it's a question of discomfort. But it progresses in something worse, and therefore he would take the healing even on Shabbos. It's correct. So if the doctor prescribes antibiotics, you take the antibiotics even on Shabbos. It's correct. Even though, for example, myself, I have medication I take every day, and I try to do is take it before Shabbos on Friday and after Shabbos on Saturday night. I have to take it once every 24 hours. So if I can avoid doing, if I have to take it twice a day, I have no choice. I have to take a Shabbos morning, but I only have to take it once a day. So I take Friday afternoon before Shabbos starts, and then once the Shabbos after Shabbos is over, and I avoid taking on Shabbos and never skip a day. So it's I don't know that I have to, but like I don't see why not. I can, so why not? Especially since there are times if I forget to pick up medication on time, I miss a few days anyway. So I miss a few days anyway, but Shabbos I have to take it. So I kind of feel like it's best if I try to avoid it if I can. Sorry? Yeah, so does the pharmacy, but not always does it work out as to call them up and this and that. Anyway, okay. So the Gemara further asks, okay, so Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explained that the reason why he would take medication for tzapidina because it could lead to a danger. It goes down to the mouth, the stomach. Rab Chiya bar Abba said to Rabbi Yochanan directly, who was doing this, asked him, come on, who are you following? Whose opinion are you relying on here when you take this medication for tzapidina? Presumably, you're following Masi ben Cheresh. You're following the opinion of Masi ben Cheresh, who in our Mishnah, a few pages earlier, or 2 pages earlier, the Amar which said, one who has a sickness of the mouth, matilun loisam b'Shabbos, can put in a medicine, put in some sort of cream on Shabbos, in his mouth. And this is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because the context of our Mishnah seems to be that the sages disagree with Masi ben Cheresh. The Mishnah was read as follows. First, the Mishnah stated that the Mishnah was talking about when a person is allowed to violate halacha to save someone. And the Gemara introduced the opinion of Masi ben Cheresh, who said that a person who has rabies was bitten by a crazy dog, literally, Kelev Shoita. Masi ben Cheresh said you're allowed to eat the liver of that dog, which was an ancient remedy. And the sages disagreed. And the reason the sages disagreed is because they didn't believe that this was an actual working remedy. And therefore you can't eat non-kosher liver. And then the Mishnah goes on to say that Masi ben Cheresh further stated that you can apply a ointment to your mouth if you have a problem there. Now, from the fact that the Mishnah lists this right afterwards, it would seem that the sages disagree. Which means your Masi ben Cheresh is in the minority here, which says you're allowed to apply ointment to your mouth when you have a problem there. Which that would mean, therefore, that the sages would tell you, Rabbi Yochanan, that you should not be putting this cream on for the tzapidina, wait till after Shabbos. That's what it would seem. Because Masi ben Cheresh is in the minority here. Following?
They would disagree because they would also believe that it wasn't a healing remedy.
Okay, so that's a good question. We're not sure. So,
because if it was a healing remedy, then that reason would not fall.
right. That's a good question. So maybe that's a good question. We're going to see soon. But we don't know for sure exactly why they're disagreeing yet. We just know they disagree.
Normally, a non-food rescue is also involving trade stuff.
Right. But if the sages were convinced that this is a tried and tested remedy, they would say, take it.
I'm trying to really get full proof that this medicine works.
So the Gemara talks about how many people have to have taken it for it to be healed.
This thing, which is just some ashes and some pits.
Right. So it's not a question of not kosher, it's a question of Shabbos now. Or maybe you have to actually burn it on Shabbos even. Maybe if you're burning on Shabbos, that would even be a bigger problem.
That'd be a bigger problem?
Yeah.
I was thinking it's more of like you burn it, crush it,
but even if it wasn't, even if it was prepared before Shabbos, you still have the problem of applying it on Shabbos, considering that the danger isn't imminent. It's not an imminent danger. It's a question of it might progress to something later. So the Chacham could argue and reason that if you pushed it off a day, nothing's going to happen to you. Be discomfort for one day, and tomorrow you'll get healed. It's also a likely explanation. But the Gemara doesn't offer explanation why the sages disagree. The assumption right now is that the sages do disagree. Thus challenging Rabbi Yochanan, how could he have applied such a medicine when seemingly Masi ben Cheresh, who he's relying on, is in the minority? This explains the Gemara. Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yochanan responded, Shani Omer, I'm of the view that bezu v'lo yacheres. When the sages disagreed with Masi ben Cheresh, they only disagreed with respect to the issue of the liver of the dog for someone who has rabies. And the reason they disagree is, as we just explained, because it's not a proven healing. Whereas this issue at tzapidina is a proven healing. And if the sages are in agreement that you can. Right? So we have, but the phrasing in the Mishnah becomes awkward now. Sorry? Yes, but the problem is the phrasing now of the Mishnah is somewhat awkward. The Gemara is going to explain the phrasing later. But at the moment, the phrasing is a little bit awkward because the way the phrasing is, it introduces an opinion of a Masi ben Cheresh that says you're allowed to eat the dog liver if one has rabies. The sages disagree. And then it says, and a Masi ben Cheresh further stated you're allowed to apply this medicine on Shabbos. The way in which that phrase is done sounds like the sages disagree with both of them because they're brought in succession. The Gemara is going to point out that this is not true at the end, but at the moment, this is what the Gemara seems.
They were actually going to disagree with both things. What they say, he brought down this, and he brought down this, and so just disagree.
That's precisely what the Gemara is going to conclude later. So very good thinking. But at the moment, the Gemara is not there yet. And what the Gemara wants to do now is introduce other texts to see if they can back up that reading. Before they say that that's the correct reading, they first want to bring other texts that will be more explicit in backing up this understanding that the sages only disagree with respect to the liver issue, because they're not convinced it's a proper healing. But they would agree with the case of Sapadina where they are convinced it's a proper healing. So we'll read one proof text in how much time we have. Okay. The Gemara says, Lema Misayeya. Let us suggest the following text supports this view. Which is as follows. Supports the view of Rabbi Yochanan, which is that the sages only disagreed with respect to specific healings where they weren't convinced they worked, but they would agree that one could take this cream for Sapadina. And this is the text. Mishnah each text that they're quoting. Misha going, one who is struck by, it seems like it's jaundice. This person whose face is turned yellow. That's what Rashi tells us. So it seems like it's kind of jaundice. So a person who is struck by this yarkon, which let's just assume it's jaundice, basar chamor, he can eat the flesh of a donkey. Apparently that's a healing. It's not kosher meat, obviously, but it's a healing, so he can take it. One who is bit by a crazy dog, rabies, can be fed the liver of that dog, which is an ancient healing. Shaloi, that dog, specifically that one. And one who has a problem in their mouth, let's assume that it's Sapadina, he can put on an ointment on Shabbos. Of course, who is speaking here? Give you a Masi ben Cheresh. This is a Masi ben Cheresh, the same one who said the same thing in our Mishnah. But now here comes the sages who disagree. The sages say, but Elu, in these, there is no healing. So we have to look at this carefully at the phrasing of the sages. The sages don't say one should not take these. That would mean that they're of the opinion that one shouldn't violate the Shabbos for such a thing. And they don't say these are forbidden, let's say. What they say is these have no healing properties. So we already have now clear words that the disagreement is not a question of halacha, but a question of medicine. If they were convinced this would work, they would allow it. That's first of all. You already see that.
The Shabbos issue kicks in.
Oh, now moreover, the kasha Shabbos, but let's see. And moreover, the way the sages say it is be'elu, and these. The Mishnah could have said, the sages say, there is no healing, ein ba mishum refuah. And we understand, we're talking about all three of these things. But when you say these have no healing, it means only there are some that don't have healings, but others that do.
They're in Israel, none of these could really be tested because your whole population, majority of your population, everyone in your population is following
How do you test it?
How do you test trace remedies?
You have to wait for the Arab merchants to inform you of the data from other countries.
Can you trust that there's?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Now in Babylonia and all those places, it's not a problem.
You have non-Jews who can, yeah.
All the non-Jews taking
But these sages are in Masi ben Cheresh and Yisrael.
Yeah.
Good point.
Much harder to try.
I guess they're Ger Toshov. You have some residents who are not Jewish who live there, following the rules, and you can use they can try it for you. Anyway, but the Gemara is pointing out the phrasing here, where the sages say these have no healing property, to mean that certain things don't have healing property, but others do. And if the Gemara says be'elu, these, when the Mishnah says the word be'elu, these, lemute mai, what's it coming to exclude? What is it excluding? It's saying these have the proper healing, but others do. So what is the thing that does? My love, is it not? Lemute sam, is it not that it's coming to exclude and say that these have no healing property, meaning those two strange ones eating deer meat, donkey meat, and eating liver from a dog, those have no. But the ointment, that does. The Gemara says that's not conclusive. No, because the Mishnah is actually coming to exclude a fourth remedy that Amasi ibn Mecheresh was in favor of, and the sages say it doesn't work. Namely, someone who lets blood for a sickness called sarnuchi. Rashi gives us French words for what it is, and I don't know what it is. Ashterlanglion, or bon. Ashterlanglion. Sounds like strangulation. That's what I thought, maybe, but it doesn't say what it is. I don't know what it is. Or hubon, B-O-N. I don't know. At any rate, so letting blood was a common healing practice back in the day. Essentially, they would let their blood
Just because it worked on poison, they thought it worked on everything.
Yeah, but people used to do it actually often. People used to do it apparently. Like the Gemara talks about people use it. That's already more recent. But
No.
in Talmudic times,
Yeah, even like they had like leeches.
yeah. The Gemara says it recommends it even. I think the Gemara recommends it a few times a year, letting blood. And essentially, the philosophy is you let blood go, and then the blood, your heart reproduces new blood, and the new blood is stronger than the old one. It's apparent that's the idea. So for the sickness called sarnuchi, people would let blood. And that was another remedy that Rabbi was in favor of doing even on Shabbos. Because according to Masa Mecheresh, this is a healing that's tried and proven. And the sages said that one we agree with. Whereas the other ones we disagree with. Which would mean, therefore, that when Masi and Mecheresh said to put the remedy on your mouth for Tzapedina, which is what Rabbi Yochanan did, the sages would disagree and say, you're not allowed to do that. Because the only time the sages agree with Rabbi Mecheresh is for letting blood for the sarnuchi. Or sarunchi, how you pronounce it. You have to use the best data you possibly have, right? Yeah. The Gemara recommends doing it a few times a year with a whole program of how you should bathe before, how you should bathe after, how you should eat before, how you should eat after. A whole system of doing it in a safe way and a healthy way. It's an ancient version. Well, actually, no, inoculation came later. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right.
I think in Eastern medicine, it's still popular.
Eastern medicine, people still let blood. Is there any studies that indicate that the new blood your heart produces after you let blood is any better than the old one?
A lot of research on blood, especially like in modern time. No justification
Really?
whatsoever. They say after you get a transplant or a new surgery, you should try and they do a lot of trying like increasing blood, just to try and put blood in you and stuff. They try and
Right.
just to get it. The transplant is something with blood. There's some ways of like use up your blood trying to get
To make it rejuvenate better.
yeah, it's like
Interesting.
transplants, you don't reject it as much. That's all I've heard for like blood stuff with
Yeah.
transplant.
Because the Gemara speaks of it. The Gemara speaks of it quite highly. If I remember correctly, the Rambam also talks about it. Chazdeus. Anyway, the Gemara says, Chachnam mistabra. And indeed, it would seem correct that the sages disagreed and said you're not allowed to put this ointment on the mouth, but you may let blood for sarunchi. Tanya, if we have another Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi, said three things that he had heard in the name of Masya, son of Cheresh, which is this person who is being lenient here, allowing these questionable healings. So the first thing was, you're allowed to let blood for the sarunchi problem. The Shabbos, even on Shabbos. Number two, Misha Nashri Kela Shaita, one who is bitten, this we've heard already, one who's bitten by a crazy dog, gets rabies, can be fed the liver of that dog. One who has a problem in his mouth, Sapadina, Shabbos, he can put ointment in his mouth on Shabbos. And the sages say, Be'elu, in these, before there's no healing. Again, that same phrasing. In these, there's no healing. But in others, there are. So which one is it? Be'elu, when it says these have no healing, lamute, what's it excluding? My love, is it not? Atarti basraisa. The first two is what they're saying is useless. I said the latter two, what they're saying is useless. The dog and the ointment for the mouth. But we allow bloodletting. Well, the multi-duration excludes the first clause, which is we allow the bloodletting. Then Gemara says, 1 second, why are you coming to that conclusion? See, the other way around. They're actually coming to say that they disagree with the first two. Don't bloodlet and don't do the liver thing. But Lamute Seifa, we're excluding the last one. We allow you to put the ointment on Shabbos. In other words, all these texts are not conclusive. Because it's a new text. Right? So you have to cross-reference all these texts and see which one the sages permit. So far, the sages could permit one of the following. Either the sages could permit bloodletting for Sronchi, or the sages could permit the ointment for the mouth, and both of those would be consistent with all the texts. And because both of them would be consistent with all the texts, you have no conclusive proof which one it is. Thus, you don't have no conclusive proof to support Rabbi Yochanan in applying this ointment on Shabbos. That's quite possibly that they only allowed the bloodletting, not the ointment. Following? We have a few more minutes, another few more lines.
Yeah, it's fine.
Good? Okay. Okay, so let's finish this section of the Gemara. Gemara says, Tashma, come on here. Tani Rabbi Bar Shmuel, Rabbi son of Shmuel said, we'll introduce another text, which will hopefully bring us clarity. Ubera Shericha, we're on top of Pedal Damid Beis, top of 84b. Ubera, a pregnant woman, Shericha, which smelled something, and as we learned in the past, this can cause great craving. That if she doesn't eat it, it can cause miscarriage. And therefore the Gemara says, Machila Noisa, she's given to eat of that food, even if it's not kosher, even if it's Yom Kippur, even if it's Shabbos, whatever it is, Acha Tashav Nafsha, until her mind is settled. And there's no more danger of her losing the baby. So that's number one. Number two, Mishanash Rekela Shaita, one who has been bitten by a crazy dog and contracted rabies, can be fed the liver of that dog. And one who has a problem in the mouth, the sapadina, Shabbos can place the ointment on Shabbos. This is the words of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi, which said, okay. So here we have a different combination of three. Pregnant woman who smelled something, the dog with the liver, and then the tzapadina with the ointment. Certainly discussed. That's what was discussed earlier in Gemara here with respect to Yom Kippur. This is a common halacha, which we apply today. Now, sages say, this one we allow, but we don't allow any other ones. Now let's go of these three. Which one would the sages be saying, this one we allow? Which of these three would the sages be saying this one? If we're talking about the pregnant woman, pshita. This is obvious. Of course, a pregnant woman who smells something and is craving it is a question of losing the baby. Of course, she's allowed to eat. Is there anyone who disagrees with that? Okay, so that's not what the sages mean when they say, this one we allow. But it could not be that the sages allowed the liver of the dog, because that our Mishnah explicitly stated the sages disagree. So what's the only one left? The ointment. If we must say, when the sages say we allow this one, it must be talking about the ointment. And this is the proof. Shema, from here we can derive indeed that Rabbi Yochanan will be of the view that this understanding the sages, that the sages disagreed with the issue of the the donkey for sure, and the bloodletting perhaps also. Not sure about that. We don't know actually. We're not clear on the dog of the bloodletting. And the sages would definitely disagree with the liver of the dog. What else is there?
Donkey.
And the donkey meat also probably. Oh, the women they agree for sure. Everybody agrees with that. And now when the sages come and say this one we agree we're allowed to take, that must mean that they're allowed to take this ointment, which means two things. A, the sages are in agreement that the healing the mouth right away is important, considering that might lead to the stomach, and pushing it off a day is dangerous. A. B, they're in agreement that this ointment is a tried and proven tested remedy. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan did so. And the Gemara concludes the comment that you made earlier. Rashi says, if you look carefully at the words of the Mishnah, we can see that the sages would agree that you're allowed to apply ointment on your mouth on Shabbos if it came to this saperdina. Because the Mishnah says, right? The Mishnah first brings an argument. The Masi ben Cheresh says you're allowed to eat the liver of the dog. Sages say no. And then the Mishnah says, but in addition, the Masi ben Cheresh also said, one who has a problem in his mouth, he can put an ointment b'Shabbos on Shabbos. And the Mishnah does not quote any of the sages that disagree with the Masi ben Cheresh in the second clause. Then we see the Pligei Rabbanan, and if it was indeed correct that the sages disagreed and said you're not allowed to apply this ointment onto your mouth, put both cases together. Say that Masi ben Cheresh says two things. He said you're allowed to eat the liver of the dog, and you're allowed to apply the ointment. The listenu, and then state halacha of the Pligei Rabbanan and the Seifa. And then the sages would disagree at the end with both clauses. But it wasn't structured that way. It was structured first with an argument, and then a separate independent statement. Exactly, implying that the separate independent statement is agreed upon by all. Shema Mina, this is indeed conclusive proof. And this closes our subject of this particular sickness. Tomorrow we get into more discussion on Safek Nefashis, when we're in doubt of life. We had another case where if a building fell upon a person, and we're not sure if he's alive or not alive, can we start removing the rocks on Shabbos to get to this person? If we know for sure he's not alive, nothing to do. If we know he's alive, certainly have to save him. But what if we don't know he's there? We're not sure if he's alive. All kinds of doubts, and that, which you mentioned a little bit in the Mishnah. And God willing, tomorrow we'll get into more details regarding that. Yeah, all of that we're going to get into. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.